The government totally sucks, you motherfucker. The government totally sucks. Ben Franklin was a rebel indeed. He liked to get naked while he smoked on the weed. He was a genius, but if he was here today, the government would fuck him up as right, GSA.
Hey, welcome to my channel. I'm East Coast Canadian, and my guest tonight is Mark Friesen. I'm in New Brunswick. He's in Saskatchewan, right?
Yeah, you bet. Saskatoon.
And we're here tonight to discuss Agenda 2030. So could you just give us a little introduction to Agenda 2030, sir?
Well, there is no little introduction to 2030, but, ultimately, global redistribution of wealth, global socialism, global governance. I mean, that's essentially the end game. It's control of the masses. It's equality of countries among and within, and essentially having all countries equally poor. I mean, if you want to achieve equality on a global scale, that's going to naturally equate to the first world being reduced to lower second to, a higher third world status to be equal, bringing up the rest of the countries to that same status. So essentially it's the destruction of Western civilization to achieve the goal of equality on a global basis. And this isn't my theory.
No.
So I always want to make that clear with folks that this isn't, a conspiracy theory that it sort of used to be when there wasn't enough information to glean from the horse's mouth. There was a lot of conspiracy theories around Agenda 21 and then of course 2030. But now it's so out in the open that I can just simply refer to UN documentation to prove everything that I'm saying.
I actually was called a conspiracy theorist today at work because I mentioned globalism, and they asked me if I watched Alex Jones.
Right. Yeah, and you'll still get that, and all that indicates is that people still have absolutely no idea. And that's one of the first questions, I ask people after they accept, some of what I'm telling them, is if this is such a good thing, if UN Sustainable Development Agenda, because that one's, I mean, if you say that one's sort of out in the ethos now. It's sort of, everybody's hearing the word sustainable. It's relatable. People are starting to pick up on it because they're promoting it. And so the first question I ask those people then is, this agenda has been in development since 1972. Why don't you know about it? Why aren't the politicians talking about it? Why have they never said anything about it, whether it's federal, provincial, or municipal? And that seems to trigger some critical thought because, obviously this agenda, it's enormous, which makes it very difficult to explain to people who have no idea what it is, because there's so many different rabbit holes and it all sounds super crazy. Like it does, and it is. But it's also real and it's also legitimate. This is what they're doing.
There was a UN compact on migration. Now they say that's non-binding or something. So what does it mean by non-binding? And how many of these compacts are there so far?
Well, there's a ton of them. And okay, so the whole non-binding thing. So picture yourself, picture yourself in high school, when you were in high school, and there was a lot of sort of agreements made between kids. The cool kids had their sort of plan, and then there was the kids on the outs, and the kids on the outs never got all the benefits, but all the kids that, were in the group got the benefits, but the kids in the group had to play along, right? Peer pressure, right? I mean, that's how society works. Any institution, wherever people are gathered, there's always peer pressure. And it's no different at a UN level. So when you look at the UN itself, and it's comprised of 195 countries, 193, sorry. there's a couple other add-ons that aren't countries, but they're entities. So within that group of 193 countries, you have a group then that's called the G77, which is actually 135 countries. None of those countries are Western nations. Then you break that down further as to, okay, who has influence in that group of 135? You look to the Islamic countries, which is 56 countries plus one, Palestine, because it's not a country. And they have enormous influence on the rest of those 135, essentially because of their oil wealth and their resources. Then you go a little further and you look at, well, who controls that 56 plus one? Who has the power in that base? And it's real easy to see it's the countries that have the resources within the Islamic countries. And those countries, along with most of them, at least a lot of them, are controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood. So there's this huge connect between globalists and Islamists. It's called we call it the red-green alliance. But when you look at the UN and you look at all of these committees and these commissions that develop all of these agendas and all of these compacts and all of these agreements, who's writing them? Who's influencing what's being written in them, and why are they being promoted in a certain way? And they all seem to be taking Western civilized countries on a path of destruction. And it's not hard to connect those dots and understand, well, okay, this is who's influencing the UN. And I mean, you only have to prove that point by saying who runs the Human Rights Commission at the UN. Right now it's Senegal. Just recently it was Saudi Arabia. Who's running the Women's Rights Commission? Well, it's Iran, right? So you're talking about countries who are some of the worst when it comes to human rights and women's rights running these commissions. So how is that possible? Well, it's possible because they have all this influence at the UN. So when we get back to the Compact on Migration, for example, when they say it's non-binding, well, horseshit. Of course it's, they're not going to say, yes, it's non-binding. Don't worry about it. Of course, that's how they're going to sell it. But if you want to get along in this group of countries that have come together to develop policy, you're going to have to make concessions. You're going to have to concede some things in this environment where you're greatly outnumbered and you don't have any leverage other than your resources, which are all under attack in our country. This whole non-binding thing is irrelevant. Then you add on the establishment parties in our country, both the conservatives and the liberals who've had power, agree to them, right? So when you have these countries agreeing to these compacts and these agreements, it doesn't need to be binding. And the reason they're agreeing to them is because they've bought into this whole idea of globalism. And why have they bought into it? Well, because they're part of the UN in order to get what they need. And we all know there's so much corruption at those levels. It's unbelievable the amount of corruption. And at the end of the day, the rest of the MPs and parliamentarians that are low level and just, they get elected and go fill a seat, none of them even have a clue what this is. Their eyes gloss over just as much as regular Joe Schmoes on the street because they have absolutely no idea. They're not required to know, right?
Just the MPs, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, MPs are completely useless. They're only there to ensure that the party, whichever party it is, platform is followed. And I mean, they represent the party. They don't represent people. And they're just told what to do. So, when we're talking about all these compacts, I mean, there's so many of them. There's, you talk about the Paris Accord. That's a big one. Paris Accord, the only reason that whole thing exists, this whole hysteria over climate change, CO2 creating climate change, is so they can extract as much wealth from Western civilization as possible. That's where the money comes to fund the rest of the agenda. The agenda itself is estimated to be budgeted about 4.5 trillion annually to fulfill the goals of the agenda. How do you fund that? And where does the money come from? Well, it comes from where the money is, where the wealth is, and that's the West. So the only reason the Paris Accord exists is a mechanism to extract the funds necessary to fulfill the goals of sustainable development. And of course, of course, within that, it's not only taxes that they're taking. Any of these charities that people give to, they're NGOs and they're connected. There's 8,000 NGOs connected to the UN and helping the UN raise money. So you're not only paying through your taxes, through everything that you buy, everything that you do that costs money, you're helping fund this. But any donations you make to any of these groups, UNESCO, Doctors Without Borders, you name it, all of them, you're feeding this whole agenda. So that's one compact, right? That's the Paris Accord, and it's extremely damaging to and effectual to us here in Canada, not only to us personally, but of course to our economy, to our industries. It's enormously destructive. But that's only one agreement. That's only one element of this whole agenda. Then you just go down the line. You go from the Global Compact on Migration, which most people are familiar with because it was in the news and it was in the sort of narrative. But then you have, which is even worse, you have the Compact on Refugees. And why I say it's worse, because in Canada, we don't have a huge issue with migration because we have the big elephant down there as a buffer from anything coming from south of their border. Of course, we have Roxham Road, and we have it's like 75,000 migrants or whatever, which isn't small. But the Refugee Pact is even more impactful on Canada because now we're having our government agree to these numbers established at the UN to take who knows how many refugees, like almost unlimited. There's however many refugees there are. I think, migrants and refugees, there's 243 million or something around the world. So when you have a UN that's dictating how many refugees you're going to settle in Canada, that's a problem. That's a bigger problem than the Global Compact on Migration. And again, doesn't matter if it's binding or not. We can see now what's happening with UNDRIP. We had Harper endorse UNDRIP a few years back, and all of a sudden now, because it's there, it's being imposed not only in Canada, but of course, if you look at South Africa and the nightmare that went on there, you have Horgan, who's a provincial premier, signed into law UNDRIP, and that's the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. He signed that thing, and how many months? 2 months later, we're having all of these blockades created by a society of Wet'suwet'en, which isn't, of course, Wet'suwet'en First Nation. It's the Wet'suwet'en Society, which is funded by Tides, which is Soros and Rockefeller. And you have those folks pushing this whole idea that we're gonna use our laws, our hereditary laws that we had in place traditionally well before the colonizer settler got here, and that's what we're going to stand on. And UNDRIP, through international law and this supranational agreement, is giving them this power to do it. And then Horgan spins back on it and says, yeah, you know what, this pipeline has to get built, which is just, of course, pandering to, whoever's left he can pander to. But I find it really interesting for a couple of reasons, because Trudeau, it was heading to become a bill nationally, this UNDRIP, and he pulled it. He pulled it back because there's too much heat right now on UNDRIP, and it's been exposed. The other interesting thing about this whole agreement is people are waking up to it. People are starting to understand how impactful this is and how supranational law or international law on a supranational agreement is dictating to us how we're going to do business, and in turn, of course, destroying our economy through the protests and all the other things that are created from it. And so that's just another agreement, UNDRIP. That's just one more added to the list. But non-binding, well, it's being put into law. We have a provincial premier who is skirting federal government and signing on to it. The other interesting aspect to that is under Section 91, subsection 24 of the Constitution, it says very clearly, and that's where it sort of delineates responsibility from a provincial or federal jurisdiction. And it's clearly federal jurisdiction when it comes to Indian bands and land claims. That falls directly under federal jurisdiction. So what is Horgan doing, signing on to an agreement, a supranational agreement that affects the whole country? What's he doing signing that document? He has no business signing that agreement. Now, did he sign it knowing this, or did he sign it because he's an idiot? I don't know. I'm assuming he knew what he was doing to help promote this whole idea of getting rid of the post-nation state. And I say that because that's what Trudeau called us a week after he was elected the first time, that Canada is a post-nation state. This is why he said that, because he knew what was coming. He knew the agreements. And here we're watching it in real time. We're watching it in real time. Our country being held hostage by some sort of international agreement, supranational agreement that has no basis in Canadian law. It's completely ignored, and that's what the Wet'suwet'en Society, funded by Rockefeller and Tides Foundation, Soros, to promote their agenda. That's just another, like I said, UNDRIP's just another agreement. Then you have the compact on education. Then you have the compact on media. And the media one is interesting. Education is interesting. They're all interesting. They're all destructive. But the media compact is interesting because you have all these media groups that have signed on to this, essentially making sure that the narrative stays on track, that their messaging is consistent, not only in Canada, but around the world. Then you add on the $622 million that Trudeau gave to our media to make sure they play along. Then you throw in Guilbeault Baggins, there, the minister of whatever he is, truth, I guess, where he says they want media companies now to be licensed and registered, but they went and backed off a little and said, but not the big news outlets. Well, no, because they've already got the carrot. They don't need the stick, right? The stick is for guys like you and me and everyone else that runs an information or develops content, through YouTube or whatever else. That's what that's geared for. So we can't tell the truth. And as soon as we start telling the truth, they'll pull our license, registration's gone, and YouTube will kick us off and we'll be finished. That's what that's for. But you have the rest of the media. I mean, we've all seen the videos, right, of all the newscasts where the narrative is written. It's emailed to all of the program directors and news directors. Here, this is what your guy's going to read today, especially when it comes to Trump or it comes to international news. This is the narrative. Okay, got it. This is what we're gonna read. You can go from 6:50 here in Saskatoon news at noon, and then you can listen to the same time in Calgary or Edmonton, Vancouver, Montreal. It doesn't matter. And the narrative, especially international news, you can't do it for local news, but international you sure can, and they do. It's the same. It's the same narrative, and that's how they educate and indoctrinate and get the sheep to follow. So that's an interesting one. Then, like I said, the education compact, you have, this common core that Obama was bringing in, where the education is dumbing down all the students. Kids don't learn anything. They're not taught how to learn. They're just taught what they're going to learn. Of course, the indoctrination, the unions, teacher unions are all on board. Some governments are more on board than other provincially, but, they all still have agreed to certain levels. Well, this education compact is going to formalize everything we've already seen.
Is that what's taking place with the Pope on May 14th?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yep. So, it's enormous. And each one of these agreements, I could spend an hour talking about. But it's all, it's this collection of agreements and compacts to achieve the 17 goals and the 169 targets of sustainable development. And we're everyone, it frustrates me to no end when I see people say, fuck Trudeau or Trudeau's got to go, because it's so much bigger than that moron. Seriously, he's a complete idiot. We all know that. Everybody knows that. He's a puppet. Get rid of him. Fill a seat with anyone that's sitting in Parliament right now. Nothing changes because it's all related to the agenda. It has nothing to do with the Liberals or the Conservatives or what. They're all part of it. It's all part of it. All these things have been agreed to. It's already in place. It's already moving forward. and they want to achieve all of these goals by 2030. And we're already seeing by how much they're pushing all these things, the impact that it's going to have. And we're just scratching the surface, and everything is going to be happening. I mean, we got trans issues where, this dad in BC can't talk to his kid because, he doesn't want his kid to go through any sort of medical transitioning from a little girl to a little boy or whatever. It's come to the point where he can't even talk to her. He can't tell his story. He's been completely censored by the courts. And this is all connected. All of this is you go to everything that happens. All you have to do is Google UN and transgender, or UN and LGBTQ, or UN and carbon tax, or UN and whatever it is. And it's all there, right? It's again, I noticed this, of course, with the whole wet's wetting thing. By the protesters, I went out a couple of times to face them here in Saskatoon. And of course, they're calling me a conspiracy theorist and laughing because I mentioned Rockefeller and Soros. But half of them are just useful idiots that have no idea. And then the other half, of course, are part of the whole, agenda when it comes to UNDRIP and it's, well, the power that it gives these people. So, it is what it is, but everything is all there. It's all there in black and white. You can read it yourselves. It's not a theory. It's a conspiracy fact. And I say conspiracy because for many years it was a conspiracy. There was a bunch of people that got together, put together a plan, and didn't tell anybody about it. They're still not telling anybody about it, right?
So this compact, sorry to interrupt you, but this compact that's coming for the education, like that would be number 4. It's like there's 17 goals, so they're going to
it would be related to number 4. Yeah,
they're going to come up with a compact for every single one of these.
Well, okay, but you have to be careful because a lot of them will associate a number of these goals, right? So they'll cross over goals. So these compacts aren't specific to each one of the goals. The compacts are agreements that will help achieve one or many of the goals at the same time, right? So it's all part of the same thing. It's all part of the big picture in a lot of cases. But of course, the education compact is going to be relative to number 4, but it's also going to be relative. They'll make a claim, and if you read on their website, they'll make a claim that it's also relative to this goal or this goal, equality of countries or gender equality. That'll be connected to the education compact because we have to indoctrinate our kids to make sure they understand that it's okay to, change your body at 6 years old from a boy to a girl. So, that's part of it. So the
gender equality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And trans and all these things. So, it's all connected. So a lot of these compacts will have a number of these goals that they want to achieve or help achieve the goals.
Now, number 15 is life on land, and 11 is sustainable cities. Now, do you think that they're going to drive everybody off of private property and into the cities? Is that something that's going to...
Yeah. I mean, and what's happening now is a really good example because with UNDRIP, this Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it essentially works outside of Canadian law. So right now we have the Indian Act, which nobody likes, and we should reform it or get rid of it, whatever. But at the same time, it is the law of our land. And whether we like it or not, that's what we should be following. And at this particular moment, we actually need that law to save any remnants of sovereignty that we think we have. Because right now we're watching the Wet'suwet'en society use traditional Indigenous law to dictate their position and give them standing, which again, like I said, is law that they used well before the Europeans came here. And so when you look at that issue, you look at it a little deeper and you come to understand that, okay, so if you look outside of the treaties that falls under the Indian Act, what's the rest of the land? Now they're claiming the rest of the land is their land, right? And so if the rest of the land is their land, that means basically from coast to coast and outside the coast, that's also theirs, every inch of it. They could definitely make an argument. That's what you saw in South Africa, where it created a whole bunch of farmers, white farmers, that turned into refugees because they're getting killed because they're not leaving their land that they've had in their families for generations, right? And this is what's going to happen here. It's starting to happen. This is exactly what we're seeing. And so there's another example, this caribou issue in BC, where they have reserved thousands upon thousands of acres of land where no human activity can be made unless you get a permit. And if you're Indigenous or First Nations, then you have access. So there's one particular part that's, like I said, thousands of acres that's now completely off off ground. It's not crown land. It's been ceded. Well, not even ceded. They call it unceded land, like they've never even given it up. And for 200 natives. So they get this enormous amount of land for 200 people. Which, okay, so this is how they're going to start. Now there's actually instances in BC where there's people trying to expand their current property because they want to, whether they have a ranch or whatever they have, whatever business they're running at their home, they want to expand, right? They want to grow more hay or whatever it is. They can't even do it anymore because it's too expensive. It would cost way too much to buy that land from this hereditary system. And then, of course, the existing land they're on is now being taxed so much that it becomes unfeasible. So what are those people going to do that own that farm, that have owned it through generations of family? Well, they're going to sell and they're going to move into the city, right? So this is the process. This is how they're going to achieve this. Now, I just pulled up today. I can share it with you if you want.
Yeah, I was just looking up something. I remember New Brunswick announcing that they're giving like one fourth of the land in New Brunswick back to the Indigenous people or something.
I heard that. Somebody yesterday told me it was 2/3, but I don't know because I can't pay attention to everything.
Well, before you share what you're going to share, this I don't know if this is it or not, but it says New Brunswick plans to double amount of protected natural areas before 2021. Says it's unprecedented right here.
Mm-hmm.
Says about 4.6% of the province, or 3,386 square kilometers, is already protected, but the government aims to reach 10% by 2020. So
what's happening and what we're seeing there is there's an agenda as part of the sustainable development to convert the earth to 50-50, right? So 50 domesticated, 50 wild, right? And this is how UNDRIP comes into this, because they're going to use the First Nations and hereditary chiefs to achieve this. They're going to allow them to continue to carry on because their population is so low, it's not going to make that much of a difference. But when you have all of this, us, and of course all this immigration, all these people coming, they're going to keep them off the land, and they're going to stack them and pack them in cities. But it's interesting when you get into this 50-50 deal, because you only have to look at an immense amount of land we have in Canada. If the UN wants to achieve 50-50 as one of their goals, they're going to have to rely on countries like Canada, who have this enormous land that they can just restrict from human activity, because you can't do it in countries like Britain, for example. You simply, there's no more land to partition, right?
Would that be land that has people on it? Because it's probably not going to be the land that's already doesn't have people on it, right?
Well, it's going to be as much as they can get, and this is why I'm saying. So if, like for instance, this family that's getting screwed around on their land, there's other examples too. They're forced to sell and move to the city. Well, then that land will just simply go back when they sell it. Who's going to buy it? Well, most likely the government, or because who else wants to buy it when you can't afford the taxes on it? You can't afford to live there because it's, you're now on hereditary land or whatever. So nobody's going to buy it. So the government's going to probably buy it, and then they'll just give it back to the hereditary anyway. So, but that's the way they're going to use to get people off, rural land and farms and you name it. Even in Saskatchewan, most of the farms now are, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of them are corporate farms. Like, they're not the family farm anymore. It's they've been taken over by, corporations. And some farmers were smart and they prepped and they bought up a bunch of land and they turned the operation into a full-blown corporation. And so they may stand a chance if they play ball. But ultimately, if you have this country in Canada where we have all this land and you as a globalist, entity want to achieve this 50-50 thing, well, Canada's where you're going to go to restrict a lot of this land, to make the global goal of 50-50 achievable. So that means it's going to go way over 50-50 here in Canada because we have all this land to the north that is, already not very populated. And so fairly easy for them to come in and say, yeah, look at us. We've prohibited human activity on all this land. That contributes nicely to the overall global goal. And because, like I said, in Britain, there's not much land that they can do that to there because it's already overpopulated. Same with a lot of countries. I mean, even India, it'd be hard to find land that you could, appropriate. And of course, that's why they look at countries like Canada. They look at countries like Australia with Aboriginals, New Zealand. These are the countries that they're counting on to use UNDRIP, South Africa, to achieve this goal. So it's all connected. It's all part of this agenda. And again, that's why Canada's really going to feel this extremely, extremely hard because there's so many things that they're coming after that the world wants. They want our resources. They want our water. They want our land. They want our oceans. They want it all, and they want control of it. And they're taking it through this agenda.
So the carbon tax, that's a great big problem. That's a factor because they're not going to allow you to use wood stoves. They're already doing that. Some places in Quebec, they're going to monitor your wood stove for carbon emissions. And if you use more than you're supposed to, they're going to tax you more if you want more points or something. Stuff like that, right? Absolutely. They're trying to punish you for what you do in everyday life.
Well, it's interesting. Saskatoon, they came up with a bylaw here a couple of years ago about backyard fire ban. Now they claimed they had to come out with this backyard fire ban, which was actually it was a time thing that they did. So they one person complained that their son had asthma and they're having trouble breathing because the neighborhood's full of smoke from all these people having fires, which whatever, complete horseshit. But what they did is they turned around and they restricted fires. So we can't have fires in our backyard. We can only have fires from 2 p.m. till 11 o'clock at night, right? Which is odd because that's the time when, if it was because of this kid who can't breathe, that's when that kid would be outside playing, and any kid that has asthma would be outside playing and would be affected the most. So it really had nothing to do with that. It was just a way for the city to, especially a city like Saskatoon, who is part of ICLEI and agreed to ICLEI, which is the group of cities around the world that have agreed to Agenda 21 and all the policies that are coming down from that. And so that's all this was, is just a way to achieve, and for a way for them to say, yeah, you know what, we're achieving our carbon emissions as part of our overall carbon emissions plan. We've restricted fires for our citizens now. Eventually, they're going to ban them altogether. That's the next step. There's no question about it. But so again, connected.
Are we going to be able to stop this, do you think? I don't think so. But
oh man, like I call it the head of the snake, right? Because all these issues, everyone's looking around at each other like, what the hell's going on here? It's just one thing after another, and it's daunting and it's enormous. But I mean, yes, can we stop it? Yes. Will it be stopped? That's the $1 million question. I mean, tomorrow, and just out of simple, example or hypothetical, if I took over Parliament tomorrow as a dictator, and I said, okay, you know what, I'm cutting off the head of the snake. There is no more UN Sustainable Development Agenda for Canada. There is no more. All of the compacts go away with it. There's no carbon tax. You can all fuck off. Our problems are fixed tomorrow. Done. You cut off the head of the snake, we're back to business. We're back to sanity. Now, again, the question is that going to happen? I don't know. I'm not sure. It all depends if we're able to get our message out. It all depends if we can educate enough people before we're completely destroyed. And I don't know the answer to that. I spend every day, all day long, trying to educate people and trying to get out. I'm putting together my own NGO with some other people involved to see if we can get some funding from people that actually want to save our country and our sovereignty, to take the message to the masses, in different ways. So I'm going to keep battling until I can't battle, or they kill me, or whatever, destroy me. Will I win? I don't know. Will we win? I don't know. But I'm not going to lay down and lick my nuts. I know that much.
Well, I know people here are feeling the fucking pinch because I've said this a dozen times in almost every one of my streams. The insurance rates, they've gone up already, and now the insurance companies want to put up a second time for the year, another fucking 35% or something crazy like that. And the groceries, every time I go to the grocery store, it's $300 or $400 because I got like 6 kids.
Right.
Yeah, it's
crazy. And everyone's gonna feel it, and everyone's starting to feel it, especially out west. I mean, the issues, of course, of pipelines and the energy industry, and now tech is gone. So yeah, are people feeling it? They're getting it, but they're not. Are they all connecting the dots? No, they're not. They're not putting it all together. And this is why I said, from a national standpoint, it's extremely important that we connect these dots and understand there is a head of the snake here, because everyone's going to feel it across the board, west or east. And they have to understand that it's all connected to this agenda. But I wanted to show this because this is in regards to that 50-50.
Leonardo DiCaprio.
So you can see that it's a UN document under the UN environment. Excuse me. In April 2019, scientists published a paper explaining why protecting half the planet is needed, and how, if embedded in a global deal for nature, it could promote increased habitat protection and restoration, national and regional conservation strategies, and to empower indigenous peoples to protect their sovereign lands. I mean, that's exactly what we're seeing in Canada right now with all these protests and the hereditary chiefs and the Wet'suwet'en Society and all this. That's it. That's what we're seeing. So anybody wants to know what's going on, there it is right there. That's your answer.
Yeah, man, that's crazy.
It is crazy. And I mean,
it seems like ever since the new year hit, it's one fucking thing after the next.
Yeah, well, and that's also a bit of a misnomer too, because all of this stuff has been in the works. It's all been, started and initiated years ago. I mean, this isn't something that they've come up with just in the last few years or since Trudeau's been around. I mean, this whole development agenda, I'll give you a little bit of history of it. In the late 60s, it was essentially conceptualized. There was a lot of talk at the UN level and other, global elites, of how they're going to achieve certain goals that they wanted to achieve. But in the late 60s, Rockefeller put a group together called the Club of Rome. And this is all factual. This is all, you can find it all. It's all there to read. They still have a website right now to this date called the Club of Rome. And, you can see who's involved and who's part of it. But they sort of conceptualized this whole plan of sustainable development. And then it went through, of course, a lot of development of its own. They brought in Maurice Strong. Papa Trudeau brought in Maurice Strong, who was an ex-oil guy, worked for Shell, worked for Husky, big wig. He was sent to the Middle East, did some work there, and they, appointed him to this whole. He was a liberal too, of course, and he's sort of considered the father of sustainable development because he was one of the first ones to help really put this thing together. And so from that point forward, it's been in creation and development to differing degrees. For at a time there, it was 8 goals they wanted to achieve. Of course, now it's 17. Then there, for a while, there was 10. Then there was the Millennium Goals. And so it wasn't signed into agreement by Canada until 1992 by the Mulroney government. And that's when essentially Canada got on board 100%. And it was actually then put into law in 2008 during Harper's reign. He signed it into law. So there's actually an act called the Sustainability Act. And on there, they are expected to develop a sustainable strategy that fits within the global goals. And then, of course, the last time it was signed, the UN Sustainable Development Agenda, Transforming Our World, was signed 1 month before the first election that Trudeau won. So when Harper was still in power, he signed it on September 27th, 2015. And it truly is transforming our world. So yes, we're seeing it now since the new year. But all of this has been happening, well before Trudeau, well before Harper, back a long time, and they've been setting things up. See, a lot of who is in the UN and comes up with all of these plans, like this is socialism on a global scale. That's all this is. It's just global socialism.
Where do they have these meetings at where they come up with these ideas? Is this like one of these Bilderberg things, or is this something different?
Yeah, that's one of them. There's many of them. I mean, a lot of people hold a lot of stock in Bilderberg, and I mean, it's part of the equation, but there's so many of them. There's so many different societies and different, NGOs and groups that are working on this. But yeah, so those type of things, those type of meetings, those type of agendas.
And so for 2030 and do some new development goals for 2050, probably.
Well, we'll see how far they get along in this agenda and achieving all the goals that they want to achieve. I mean, if they achieve like a tenth of what they want to achieve out of 2030, we're done. We're finished. Our economy's in the toilet, and we're 100% dependable on this whole thing. But this whole plan, this comes from the Fabian society, the Fabian communists, socialists, the ones that didn't want revolutionary communism. They didn't want to bring it in through violence. They wanted to bring it in through incremental change. And that is getting this into our education systems, getting this narrative into the media, getting it into, all of these different institutions, and drip by drip by drip. It's the long game, and they're all playing a part in it. They're all, and ultimately, people struggle with reconciling between socialism and all the big multinational corporations and all the bankers and all these things. Well, they're all part of it. It's about power. People want power. People want control. They want to be able to control the masses. They're still going to fill their coffers. I mean, look at Rockefeller. He's an enormous quote unquote capitalist, as people would see him as. But really, he's a hyper socialist, probably closer to being a fascist, where everything he does is connected to government. He has everybody in everyone's pocket. He's funding this hereditary chief society called the Wet'suwet'en Society through tithes. Why would he be attached to this crazy socialist lefty Soros? Well, because they're one and the same. They have the same goal, and that's power. And that's achieving these goals to make all countries equal and poor and dependent on this one global governance. And of course, you add on the UN parliamentary campaign. So there, parliamentary assembly. It's a campaign to achieve an actual parliament at the UN, similar to its baby brother, the EU, that Britain just left. Same idea, except they want it on this global scale where there's this parliament. That's basically a formality. They already have global governance. It's already in place. It's already established. That's how they're achieving and getting these compacts signed and getting UNDRIP established and Agenda 21 and ICLEI and all the cities on board, and so we already have global governance. It's not called anything yet.
And that's what I like. Maybe it's clear to everybody, or maybe it's not clear to everybody, but from what I see, we have a provincial tax where we live in our little city or rural area.
Yep.
And then our federal tax, and this fucking carbon tax is just a global tax. That's what it is.
That's all it is. It's redistribution of wealth. It's taking wealth from Western civilization, where the wealth is, and redistributing it in the way they want. So
what do you think of Alberta Court of Appeals stating that the carbon tax was unconstitutional. That was pretty
Yeah,
cool.
I think it's good. Of course, it's good news. It's, like, cool, but does it mean anything? Not yet. I
No,
mean,
Trudeau wants to go to the fucking Supreme Court.
oh yeah,
now.
it'll guaranteed it's going to the Supreme Court, and it'll probably be ruled otherwise. There would be my guess.
And the judge will get some money in his pocket, probably.
I mean, they're all. I have zero faith that it's going to go anywhere. This is all show. Everything we're seeing is all show. It's all smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, fuck. I don't know. But when I researched it, when I seen that it was right on the United Nations website, they're not hiding it.
No,
So,
fuck no.
No,
They're not hiding it, but they're doing a piss poor job of promoting it, right? And there's a reason. It's by design. I mean, seriously, if Canadians, sleepy, dopey Canadians, could wrap their head around 10% of what's going to change for them, they would be livid. It's like, no, wait a minute, I don't want this. I don't want some global entity determining what's going to happen in policy in Canada. But most of them have no idea. They even the little that they do promote, like they got Hollywood through their Angry Birds 2 movie. They got them to promote the UN agenda, Sustainable Development Goals, and Act Now, pumping it, indoctrinating all our kids through the media. So that, I mean, they do sort of stick their toes in the water when it comes to promoting it. But like, is there an education campaign being run by the government to inform everybody as to what's all going to change? No, and they won't do that because people, it's still, obviously we could still say, go fuck yourself on all of it. But they're moving forward with it, and it's all there for everybody to see, which, I mean, that's the one nice part about it is when people call me a conspiracy theory, I just go show them, this document, and conversation's over, right? I can do that with UNDRIP. I can do that with all of these compacts and these agreements and the whole development agenda. It's just a matter of getting people to actually engage and want to understand. Most people don't, my friend. Most people want to stay in their little bubble. They want to go to work and they want to come home and they want to feed their families and they want to take Johnny and Susie to hockey practice. And then they want to, go to bed and watch, whatever TV until they go to sleep and do it all over again. So people don't want to know any of this. They really don't, because if they did, most of them would probably go crazy, which is probably why I'm a little crazy.
There was another question I had for you too. What was it now? Oh yeah. How far down the rabbit hole do you go? Do you stop at Agenda 2030, or do you think there's any connection with this coronavirus?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I go down the rabbit holes, but I don't see a lot of value, because what I want to achieve is mass education and information that the masses can find receivable. So, I mean, do I expose myself to a lot of other things that are a lot deeper down these holes? Absolutely, I do. But am I going to promote that information? Nope. Because as soon as I do, then I lose any credibility that I would have with the masses on stuff that's already promoted or at least available in the mainstream, right? So I'm very careful of where I go with these things, because I have to be able to present in a way that's, like I said, receivable and understandable and credible in their eyes. I mean, I know that I could prove a lot of things deeper in these rabbit holes, but it's going to take me away from my what I want to achieve, and it's going to repel me from the people who I need to be able to reach. So I'm pretty careful about promoting too deep into these rabbit holes, because it already sounds, people that aren't exposed to any of this information, it already sounds like it's fucking crazy. And really it is. They're not wrong. It is crazy, but it's reality. But so to take them any further down a hole, I don't see a value in that until we have this mass education accomplished, which I'm not even sure it is able to be accomplished. There's no point in going any deeper.
No, and it seems like most of these people don't even care.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I said. People don't want to know because it's too much. It's too much to digest. It's too much to understand. They don't want their lives to be affected. They're the ostrich. They just stick their head in the sand and nothing's happening around me. It's all good. It's like a prairie chicken. You're hunting prairie chicken and this thing stands behind a twig that's like this. It's like you can't see me, but I can, and I just blew your head off. And that's exactly what these people are like. What Canadians are like. They just hide and pretend it's not happening and go along with the Joneses. It's amazing to me. Even this whole gender, whatever fluidity and transgender and all this shit that they're pumping in the schools. I mean, I can't imagine if my kids were still in school, especially elementary, but probably high school too. I would be losing my mind. I'd be down at the school probably every day. In fact, I'd probably pull my kids out of school and homeschool them because of the insanity. But so and what are parents doing now? They're nothing. They just go with the Joneses and they keep their mouth shut and hope it doesn't affect too bad. It's insane. But a lot of them too, I think, are probably indoctrinated by the media. They're indoctrinated. They watch TV and they watch the mainstream news and they're so ill-informed and misinformed and falsely confident about things. I don't know.
They throw little hints everywhere you look, on the TV and the music. Even when you're scrolling through Facebook, there's little ads that just put little messages in your head, so people become desensitized to it, right? So
absolutely. Oh yeah, we have a whole society full of zombies. Like I wrote a post here earlier. I was at the grocery store in the parking lot, and I'm watching people walking into the store, and I'm getting frustrated and angry just watching them because I'm thinking, none of you fuckers think about any of this, do you? Like, none of you people have any idea what the hell's going on. You're like zombies walking into the store, walking home, and shut out completely from reality. And I just want to get out. I want to shake them and tell them to wake up.
Veggie burgers and pride flags. That's all it's about now.
Oh, it's just incredible, just incredible. And
anyway.
And I mean, it's going to affect everybody. It's starting to affect everybody. And I mean, you look at Tim Hortons, right? For an example, they start marketing this Beyond Meat shit that nobody asked for, right? Like, nobody that I know or can find was saying, "Hey, Tim Hortons, can you bring some Beyond Meat to the menu so we can have options?" Like, it wasn't like there was a demand first, right? Like in a normal free market enterprise, the people decide, "Hey, you know what? I want this." And the neighbors say, "Yeah, holy shit, I want that too." And then there's supply that's created to feed that demand. They flip-flop this whole thing and they've created the supply trying to create a demand, right? And this is, I mean, that's social engineering 101. So it's not a free market. It's not free market principle. It's now social engineering. So we're going to use, this fascist method of combining government policy with big business to promote the idea that, hey, plant food is much better for you than pork, right? And so we're going to give up to this Beyond Meat option, and we're going to socially engineer everybody to think it's a good idea. It didn't work, not yet, but I see they're still trying to promote it. Then you have the UN promoting the idea of protein replacement, which, eat bugs. They have this whole series of videos promoting, people eating bugs, and it's really not that bad of a thing. It's really kind of cool. Other cultures do it, so why can't we? So it's all this social engineering that's a huge part of them achieving their goals. And that's just one example, of course.
There's nothing like a T-bone steak on the barbecue, man.
Well, that's right. All right. And that's, I mean, for a lot of us, as soon as they start suggesting all this shit, it's like, no, now I really want a steak. Now I want the biggest, fattest, juiciest steak. Stick it on the Barbie and let it fill the neighborhood with CO2 and beautiful smells of barbecue.
And maybe that's the thing, right? Because cigarettes, they cost $20 in New Brunswick for a pack of smokes, and they know people will buy them. So if they
absolutely
the red meat, $40 for a T-bone, they know people will buy it.
Absolutely, man. That's what it is. Like We don't buy steak as much as we used to because it's simply, we can't afford it. I mean, I suppose we could, but I mean, I don't want to pay $40 for a nice juicy steak. I still will because I enjoy them, but I sure as fuck not as much because I just, who wants to pay that kind of money? So, whatever. But that's of course going to affect the beef industry and this whole narrative to not eat beef and not eat meat, and that affects our ranchers, and so I mean it's all connected. It's the economy is connected to the people, and it's all being affected. It's all being attacked. It's all Western civilization, my friend. They want it gone. They want capitalism gone. And I mean, we've seen numerous UN officials, usually on their way out, make the statement. We have Christiana Figueres. If you just search quotes that she's made, she admits to the fact that this has nothing to do. This whole Paris Accord and climate change has nothing to do with the climate. It has everything to do with changing the global system from a capitalist system to a socialist system. She's admitted it openly, right? And for some reason, nobody understands. Nobody wants to learn. Nobody wants to accept the reality that this is the agenda. This is what they're doing. This is what they're moving forward on. And I mean, I know I get it. It's difficult for people. I mean, it's even for me. I've spent, probably 18 years studying this shit so I can understand it and connect all the dots, and it's overwhelming for me. Even to this day, it's overwhelming. I find this document that I showed you earlier on the 50/50, and it's like, great, more proof, more, things to convince people with, but it's like, holy Christ, and then you see the consequences of these things happening, like tech going to shit, and a CGL pipeline, and industries collapsing, and people losing their livelihoods, and and I know exactly why it's happening, and I'm watching how nobody else does, and it pisses me off. So it's not an easy thing. This isn't something I enjoy. I don't want to be part of any of this, but I have to understand what's going on, and now that I do, I have to be able to tell people.
All right. Well, you're very knowledgeable. I know that. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to me.
Hey man, anytime, and if you want to, anytime you want to drill down on any one of these specific topics, because like I said, it's so enormous, and there's so much to this agenda that, I mean, we could probably spend weeks just talking about specific issues and how they're going to affect us. But yeah, I mean, my pleasure. I appreciate just another platform to use to hopefully educate some folks that haven't heard or seen me before, or the information.
What's next for you? You're running for office, I heard, or?
No, that the election's over. So there's no office to run for. And again, it wasn't really about me getting elected. I didn't honestly believe, like, I thought maybe there was a chance that I could probably get elected, but more important to me, like, first of all, I don't want to be a politician. That's the last thing I ever thought of I want to do. But I took it just like the same reason I joined the Yellow Vest, same reason, I do any of what I do. It was a platform for me to use to help educate people. And if you looked at my campaign, whether it was online or, forums or whatever, this is all I talked about, right? Like, there was nothing outside of the UN. There was nothing not connected to the UN agenda, because it was a platform that I could use to help educate people. And it worked. And there was a lot of people that were exposed to it, and a lot more people talking about it. So, is my aspiration politics? No, I don't want to be a politician. In fact, the day that I'm comfortable that most people know what the hell's going on, I'm done. My job is complete. I can go and build my cabin in the woods and carry on. So, having said that, I'm creating this forum. It's called the Forum for Canadian Sovereignty, and I'm hoping to be able to reach the masses. There's myself and Salim Mansour, a couple other folks you guys wouldn't know the names, but we're putting together this forum so we can start taking this information to town halls and reaching people on the street, in the mainstream, the sleepy dopey ones. Try to market in a way that's attractive for them to come and listen, and we want to do that sort of nationally. And then from that, we want to build some subgroups that can go, like if we're doing a national stop in Saskatoon, then the folks in Saskatoon that are active and want to expand this, then they can take it to, other smaller towns. And hopefully we'll have a funding mechanism that we can, help these groups do this, because it takes money. Like, you have to be able to travel. You have to be able to develop, materials and resources for people. And so, we're just waiting for that incorporation to finish the paperwork and the legal stuff. We did have a donor to help us with that, so that was cool. So that's kind of what I'm working on now. I'm hoping once the papers are done that we can sort of start putting that plan into action.
Right on. So again, everybody who's watching, if you don't know who this is, which I would find hard to believe if you don't, his name is Mark Friesen, and he's got a channel on YouTube. It's just listed under Mark Friesen, I believe, right?
Yeah, YouTube's Mark Friesen. Then I got, same thing on Facebook. Search my name, you'll find me. I can't add any more friends. I'm at my limit. I have to start dumping a bunch. But I also have my Facebook page, and then I have a page for Forum for Canadian Sovereignty. And then I have my Talkie Night in Canada page, which is my Saturday night show that's on YouTube. But that's also just Mark Friesen on YouTube. So,
all right, buddy. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Anytime. Let me know.
See you on Facebook.
All right, man. See you later.
The government totally sucks, you motherfucker. The government totally sucks. Ben Franklin was a rebel indeed. He liked to get naked while he smoked on the weed. He was a genius, but if he was here today, the government would fuck him up his righteous aid.